It was whispered among people that in this Harlem darkness was more than just the absence of light. Darkness was a living thing. It breathed, it watched, and sometimes it devoured those who dared challenge its rules. And on that fateful night in November 1930, the darkness was hungrier than ever. The story begins at abandoned warehouse number 42 on the edge of West Harbor, where the stench of the Hudson River mingled with the smell of old rusty engine oil. It was raining heavily. The raindrops lashed against the corrugated iron roof of the warehouse, creating a chaotic symphony that drowned out the pounding heartbeats of 10 men hidden inside. 10 assassins. 10 seasoned wolves selected from the dirtiest dark holes of New York's underworld. They were there with one purpose: to ensure that Ellsworth, Bumpy Johnson, would never see the sun rise the next day. But why 10 to kill a man? Usually only one bullet is needed. But Bumpy Johnson wasn't an ordinary man. He was a living legend, a ghost walking in broad daylight. His enemies, including the notorious mob boss Dutch Schultz, understood that confronting Bumpy was like trying to punch smoke. You put in all your strength, but all you get is emptiness and then a cold, sharp blade at your throat. Therefore, they needed a trap. A perfect trap. The invitation sent to Bumpy that morning was brief. Come to warehouse number 42 at midnight. Alone. We will renegotiate territory. If you bring anyone, your men will die. It was a crude threat, an obvious trap that even a rookie pimp could smell. Bumpy's most trusted lieutenants knelt begging him not to go. They said Dutch Schultz had no honor, that this was an execution, not a negotiation. But Bumpy remained silent. He sat in his leather armchair in his luxurious apartment, his fingers gently turning a queen on a chessboard. In his mind, the moves were 1,000 steps faster than reality. He knew they were waiting. He knew it was a trap. But he also knew a cruel rule of power. If a king flees his throne out of fear, the throne is no longer his. Fear spreads faster than the plague, and if Bumpy didn't come, his name would become a laughingstock in Harlem. At exactly 11:55 p.m., a sleek black car pulled up in front of the warehouse, tearing through the heavy rain. There was no entourage, no heavy machine guns. Only Bumpy stepped out of the car. He wore an expensive custom-made suit, impeccably tailored, as if he were going to an opera house rather than a slaughterhouse. His fedora tilted slightly, partially obscuring his eyes, but betraying an unnerving calmness. He adjusted his collar, took a deep breath of the damp, deathly air, and strode toward the massive ajar iron door. Inside the warehouse, 10 assassins held their breath. They had heard too many tales of this man, that he had eyes that could see into the soul, that he was as swift as a black panther and more ruthless than the devil. Their hands tightened around their triggers, cold sweat running down their spines despite the biting cold. The iron door creaked open. The headlights of a car cast Bumpy's long shadow across the dusty warehouse floor. He stood there alone, small in the vast space, with 10 dark muzzles of guns pointed directly at him. "I thought you were smarter than that, Bumpy." The leader, a man with a long scar running down his face, broke the silence. His voice was loud, tinged with mockery, but also full of tension. "Did you really come here alone, to die like a stray dog?" Bumpy didn't answer immediately. He calmly pulled out a pack of cigarettes and lit one. The flame from his Zippo lighter flared up, illuminating his angular, cold, sculpted face. He took a long drag, exhaling smoke into the dark space before him. His demeanor was so calm it was insulting. It was like a slap in the face to the 10 men brandishing their weapons. "You've misunderstood." Bumpy finally spoke. His voice was deep, warm, but resonant like distant thunder without a hint of tremor. He glanced over each face, his gaze sharp as a razor. "I didn't come here to negotiate, and I didn't come here to die." He took another step forward, the sound of his leather boots clicking against the concrete floor like a steady ticking of a death clock. The 10 assassins instinctively recoiled. An invisible fear began to creep into their minds. Why wasn't he afraid? Why was he coming? Was he insane? Or did he possess some secret weapon? "I'm here," Bumpy continued, his right hand casually tucked into his jacket pocket, "to teach you one last lesson. A lesson about the difference between a hunting dog and a lion." The ringleader yelled, "Kill him! Blow his brains out!" The clanging of metal echoed. 10 fingers simultaneously squeezed the triggers. But in that very moment, Bumpy Johnson moved. Not a human movement, but an explosion of survival instinct honed through thousands of street battles. He didn't draw his gun. He flung his heavy coat forward like a net, obscuring the view of his opponents, and simultaneously plunged into the darkness beside the stacked crates. Gunfire erupted. Bullets ripped through the floor, pierced the wooden crates, and sparks flew everywhere. But the target was gone. Bumpy had blended into the darkness of the warehouse. Now the game had changed. The 10 hunters suddenly realized they were trapped in a cage with a monster. The warehouse door slammed shut, cutting off the faint light from outside. Darkness enveloped everything. And in that darkness, Bumpy Johnson was truly king. He knew every nook and cranny of fear by heart. He knew how to move silently. And most importantly, he carried a weapon more dangerous than bullets, a razor-sharp switchblade, and a cold, icy mind. A blood-curdling scream erupted from a hidden corner, then abruptly fell silent. A crisp thud of metal-piercing flesh. 9! Bumpy's voice echoed from all directions, eerie and mocking. Only 9 more to go. Panic began to grip. The assassins started firing wildly into the darkness, shouting each other's names for reassurance, but all they heard was the torrential rain on the tin roof and the faint, fleeting footsteps. Tonight at Warehouse 42, Bumpy Johnson was not just a crime boss. He was the embodiment of punishment, and the trap that the wolves set has now become their own grave. The darkness in warehouse number 42 was not silent. It screamed. Tommy's submachine gun spat fire incessantly, tearing through the night in blinding, aimless streaks of light. The 9 remaining men were shooting at their own fears. They fired at the wooden crates, at the iron pillars, at the dancing shadows on the walls. The acrid smell of gunpowder quickly filled the space, mingling with the musty odor to create a suffocating atmosphere. "Stop, you fools! Stop!" The scarred leader yelled, his voice hoarse from the gunfire. "You're shooting into thin air! Save your bullets!" The gunfire ceased. Silence returned 1,000 times heavier. Now, only the chaotic gasps of the 9 assassins and the incessant rain on the corrugated iron roof could be heard. They stood back to back, forming a loose defensive circle, their eyes darting frantically for target. But Bumpy Johnson wasn't there. In the world of gunmen, power lies in firepower. But in Bumpy's world, power lies in patience and the shadows. He was crouching on a steel beam 3 meters above their heads. Like a hunting black panther, he watched the panicked rats below. He wasn't in a hurry. He knew that fear takes time to seep into the bone marrow. When prey panics, they make mistakes. And mistakes in the underworld always cost lives. A flash of lightning from the storm outside flickered through a broken window, illuminating a corner of the warehouse for a split second. One of the henchmen standing apart from the group suddenly turned around. He'd heard the faint clanging of metal chains. "Anyone?" he whispered, his gun barrel trembling as he pointed it at the dark corner. There was no answer. Only a strong hand emerged from the shadows, clamping his mouth shut and pulling him forcefully into the endless night. Not a gunshot, not a scream. Only the rustling of fabric and the crisp snapping of a neck bone. The limp corpse was gently dropped to the floor, as soft as a falling leaf. 8, a whispered voice echoed seemingly from every direction, reverberating from the cold iron walls. Panic erupted. "It's over there, shoot!" another man yelled, unleashing a barrage of bullets into the pile of crates. But when the gunfire ceased, the only thing that fell was splinters of wood. Bumpy had moved long ago. He moved as silently as a wisp of smoke, his expensive leather boots seemingly not touching the ground. Bumpy didn't use a gun. Gunfire would reveal his position. He used his pearl-handled switchblade, the inseparable weapon that had made the professor famous. In the darkness, the blade was king. It was silent, precise, and ruthless. One by one, they were separated from the pack. One was dragged under a dilapidated truck. Another was strangled from behind by a rope while reloading. Suffocating groans and the sharp, rhythmic sound of knives tearing through flesh echoed like the beat of a death symphony. The number of enemies dwindled. 7, 6, 4, 2. With each body that fell, the spirits of the remaining men crumbled a little more. They were no longer cold-blooded killers. They had become lost children in a haunted house. They began shooting wildly, almost hitting each other. The scarred leader, now drenched in cold sweat, leaned against the brick wall, his gun in hand, but not knowing where to aim. He realized a horrifying truth. They hadn't imprisoned Bumpy Johnson in this warehouse. Bumpy Johnson had imprisoned them here with him. Finally, complete silence returned. No more gasping breaths from his men. No more clanging of guns. Only the leader stood alone amidst the pile of his comrades' corpses. He panted, his eyes wide, staring into the darkness before him. "Come out, Bumpy!" he shouted, but his trembling voice betrayed his utter terror. "I know you're there. Come out and face me like a man." "I've been here all along," a deep voice echoed from behind him. The leader jumped, spinning around his finger, gripping the trigger. Click! The sound of a metal hammer striking the empty chamber. He had fired his last bullet into thin air without realizing it. Another flash of lightning illuminated Bumpy Johnson. He stood less than 2 meters away. His suit was still immaculate, only a little dust clinging to his shoulders. In his right hand, the gleaming switchblade was spotless, for he was an artist, and artists leave no mess. Bumpy looked at the leader, his eyes devoid of anger, only pity for a pawn on a chessboard. "You, what kind of creature are you?" the leader stammered, his feet stumbling back until he tripped over the body of his own comrade and fell to the floor. Bumpy slowly approached, folding the knife with a sharp click. He bent down, picked up the Tommy gun that had fallen to the ground, examined it briefly, and tossed it into the darkness. "I am the consequence," Bumpy said softly. "I am the price Dutch Schultz has to pay for thinking he could buy Harlem with money and violence." He pulled out a cigarette but didn't light it. He squatted down in front of the trembling leader, looking him straight in the eyes. "I'll let you live," Bumpy said. The words stunned the gang leader. "But not because I'm merciful. I'll let you live so you can run back and tell your boss what happened here tonight. Tell Dutch Bumpy Johnson doesn't play checkers. Bumpy Johnson plays chess, and I just captured all his pieces." Bumpy stood up, turned his back, and walked toward the front door. He pushed open the heavy iron door. Streetlights and a chilling blast of air rushed in, dispelling the smell of death. He stepped outside, leaving behind 9 corpses and a man whose spirit had been shattered. Outside, the rain had stopped. Bumpy took a deep breath, adjusted his fedora hat, and walked leisurely down the waterlogged street. Tonight, Harlem slept peacefully, unaware that the order of the underworld had just been rewritten in blood. He went in alone. He left alone. The legend of Bumpy Johnson is not just written in words. It is etched in the enduring fear of his enemies. As the gray dawn began to creep across Manhattan's skyscrapers, the atmosphere at Dutch Schultz's opulent downtown headquarters was so tense it could split a tree in two. Dutch, the notorious Jewish crime boss known for his erratic and brutal nature, paced back and forth in his office. He was waiting for good news. He was waiting for Bumpy Johnson's corpse to be thrown at his door as a victory gift. But instead, the office door burst open, and the leader of the hit squad walked in. Or rather, his empty shell. His clothes were tattered, his face smeared with oil and black soot, his eyes wide and vacant, like someone who had just returned from hell. He collapsed onto the expensive Persian rug, his whole body trembling uncontrollably. 9 people, he stammered, his voice breaking. "All dead, only me. He let me live." Dutch Schultz froze the cigar in his mouth, falling to the ground. He grabbed his henchman by the collar and roared, "What did you say? 10 men, 10 of the best gunmen couldn't kill a black man who was unarmed." The henchman shook his head vigorously, tears and snot mixing together. "That wasn't a man, boss. It was a ghost. He didn't run away. He hunted us. He said he didn't play checkers. He played chess, and he just captured all your pieces." Dutch released his grip, and the henchman collapsed to the floor. For the first time in years, Dutch Schultz felt a chill run down his spine. He understood the message. In the underworld, killing a man was an act of violence, but sparing an enemy, allowing him to take fear home, was an act of power. Bumpy hadn't just defeated Dutch's men. He had broken his will to fight. Meanwhile, in Harlem, life continued as if the previous night's massacre had never happened. Bumpy Johnson sat at his usual diner on 125th Street, leisurely enjoying his breakfast of scrambled eggs and black coffee. The New York Times lay open on the table, but his mind was preoccupied with a larger game of chess. The Harlemers passing by bowed to him with a mixture of respect and fear. They called him Professor Robin Hood. They didn't know the details of what had happened at Warehouse 42, but they sensed a change in the atmosphere. This morning, Dutch Schultz's henchmen, who usually swaggered around collecting protection money, had vanished from the streets. Their silence was Bumpy's triumphant roar. Bumpy understood that violence was merely a tool, not an end in itself. The end was order. By walking out of that deadly trap alone, he drew a red line around Harlem. He sent a silent ultimatum to all the Italian mafia families and Jewish gangs. You can be king in Manhattan, in the Bronx, or in Brooklyn. But in Harlem there is only one king, and that throne is not for outsiders. A few days later, a tacit agreement was reached. Dutch Schultz, though insane and arrogant, was also a shrewd businessman. He understood that the cost of waging war against Bumpy Johnson far exceeded the potential profit. He was forced to back down, agreeing to share the lottery profits and respecting the territorial boundaries. That was Bumpy's greatest victory, a victory that didn't require a bloody all-out war on the streets where innocent people would have been caught in the crossfire. The story of that night in Warehouse 42 had become a legend, whispered in barbershops, jazz bars, and gambling dens across America. They said Bumpy could deflect bullets with his bare hands, that he could vanish into the shadows. These rumors only thickened his protective armor. But as night fell, as Bumpy sat alone in his office, gazing out at the glittering lights of Harlem, the very place he had spent his life protecting and ruling, he knew the truth was much simpler. He wasn't a superhero. He was just a man willing to do the most ruthless things to keep his world peaceful. He was a necessary monster to stop even worse monsters. Bumpy Johnson raised his cognac glass, gently clinking it against the silent air as if to commemorate those who had fallen and the lost part of his own soul. He walked into that warehouse as a gangster, but he walked out as a true godfather. And so the lesson was etched into the bloody history of New York's underworld. You can set traps for tigers, you can hunt wolves, but never ever walk into Harlem and think you can checkmate the Black Flag King. Because Bumpy Johnson wasn't just a man, he was Harlem, and Harlem is immortal.